This video is, this teaching is what kept Moses from entering into the promised land. The root of Moses' problem was found in Exodus 2:12 when he deliberately tried to cover up his sin. Moses deliberately killed an Egyptian in Exodus 2:12. And the verse goes like this: and he looked this way and that way, and when he saw, and there was, as in parentheses, no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Moses tried to hide his sin. In his heart he justified killing the Egyptian because the Egyptian was smiting one of his brethren. Adam and Eve were in fear because they justified their sin. They covered their sin with their own righteousness. They clothed themselves in fig leaves and hid from God. Moses tried to hide his sin by burying his sin in the sand. Moses could not enter into the promised land because he failed to examine his heart, to repent for hiding his sin. Fear had set up in Moses' heart, the same as Adam and Eve. When we justify our sins, we are telling God, I am not guilty, God. Fear led to anger, and anger led to disobedience. The first sign of fear that Moses had is in Exodus 2:14. Verse 13 tells us, and when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. And he said to him that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou fellow? Verse 14 says, and he said, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. So that was a fear that Moses had. That's why God couldn't use him. Moses, until he had, to that whole generation had died out, he couldn't remove the splinter out of his own brother's eyes because he had a board in his own. God couldn't use Moses to deliver his people until the people that wanted to kill Moses were dead. Moses feared his wife Zipporah and not God. God had told Abraham in Genesis 17:10, this is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. Moses didn't obey God, and God was going to kill him because of disobedience. In Exodus 4:24, Moses' son was then circumcised by Zipporah, his wife, and the Lord let Moses live. In verses 25 and 26, we can see that happening. Moses had excuses why he couldn't achieve the plan of God in Exodus 4:11. And the Lord said unto him, who hath made man's mouth, and who maketh the dumb, or the deaf, or the seeing, or the blind? Have not I the Lord? God had to feed Moses with milk because he was still a baby Christian. Moses in Exodus 4:1 had the fear of man, but didn't have faith in God to help him until God gave him a crutch. In Exodus 4:1, then we see this. And Moses answered and said, but behold, they will not believe me, nor hearken unto my voice. For they will say, the Lord hath not appeared to thee. Does this sound familiar? Do we have the same excuses for not obeying God? Verse 2 says, and the Lord said unto him, to Moses, what is, and then he is in parentheses, that in thine hand? And he said, a rod. Verse 3 says, and he said, cast it on the ground. And it became a serpent. And Moses fled from before it. Moses was again in fear. God was giving Moses milk to help him grow spiritually until the time that God would take away his crutch. The rod was considered a crutch in a way. Verses 4:11 says, and thou shalt take this rod, or this crutch, in thy hand, wherewith then shall do signs. Moses' faith stopped at the crutch in his own ability with his own hands. Moses' fear had caused him to have anger, and anger caused him to disobey God in Numbers 20:10. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, And he said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? Verse 11 says, And Moses lifted up his hand with his rod, he smote the rock twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. God had taken away Moses' rod or crutch to test his faith, and Moses failed. Numbers 20, verses 7 and 8 says, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, verse 8, says, Take the rod, and gather together thou and Aaron and thy brother, and speak to the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So shall give the congregation and their beasts to drink. In Luke 22, verse 38, we can see that Moses, God had used the same thing, the testing of Peter. He told Peter to bring the sword. God had told Moses to bring the rod in Numbers 20, verse 8, to test, to see what was in Moses, in his heart. The same as Jesus had told Peter to bring the sword in Luke 22:38. Fear and anger had caused Moses and Peter both to step out of love and disobey God. Fear caused Peter to deny Jesus 3 times. Justifying our own sins is the root of fear and anger. Our examples are Adam and Eve, Moses, and also King Saul. Bearing your sin is hiding it in the sand. Fear always causes us to hide from God. Perfect love is those like Job who have learned to control their tongue and confess their sins to heal. The knowledge of God is obedience to His Word. Ephesians 4:13 says, Till we all come into the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, into a perfect man, into the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. 1 John 4:17 says, Herein is our love made perfect, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as He is, so are we in this world. Verse 18 says, There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. So that's a very good verse. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. So we see that Moses was not made perfect in love at that time, because he feareth. Moses couldn't enter in to the promised land because he hadn't learned to control his tongue. James 3:2 says, For in many things we offend, and offend means sin. And if any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man, and is also able to bridle his whole body. Excuses for our sin come from our mouth. Justification is saying we have no sin and we are not guilty. In 1 John 2:4, He that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandment, is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whosoever keepeth the word, and that's obedience out of love, in him verily is the love of God perfected. Hereby know that we know him, that we are in him. Hereby know we that are known, we know him. Okay? So we can see that in Job 9:20, Job, he says, if I justify myself, my mouth shall condemn me. I perfect shall also prove me perverse. If Job said he was perfect, it would prove him perverse. Job 11:14. If iniquity be in thy hand, put it far away, and let not wickedness dwell in thy tabernacles. Okay, we got to get rid of any sin. Darkness is wickedness. Hiding or burying sin in the sand is darkness. Verse 15. Then shalt thou lift up thy face without spot, yea, shalt thou be steadfast and not fear. Uh, we can see that Moses repented of his sin in Numbers 32:23. After he was told he would not enter the promised land, by this statement we can see that he confessed his sin of burying the Egyptian in the sand. Verse 23, but if ye will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Unrepentant sin always finds us out. Moses could not enter into the promised land because of no faith. Hebrews 3:19 says, so we see that they could not enter in because of their unbelief. So many have deceived themselves by trusting in the hands of men who have laid their tool on the rock. Moses hit the rock twice and profaned the holiness of God. Jesus was the rock. What does this mean? God gave us a natural medicine by the hands of God. Man laid his tool on medicine. God has designed natural herbs for medicine. The great physician is our faith. Our battles are the Lord's, but man has laid their tool on violence to profane the protection of God. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay, as it tells us in Romans 12:19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourself, but give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. Now, I hope that this teaching helps you realize that anytime we try to hide our sin and justify ourselves, then that's a scary place to be with God, because Moses couldn't enter into the promised land because he disobeyed God. So disobedience is a very bad thing. But thank goodness that later on Moses repented. And Numbers 32:23, he repented of his sin when he said, but if you will not do so, behold, I have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Unrepentant sin always finds us out. God bless you. Thank you.